complete, we'll be through with Proverbs today. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 25, there's a way that seems right to man. But what happens? That's right. The end is destruction. The end is death. Proverbs 17:27. Whoever restrains his words has what? Knowledge. What about he who has a cool spirit? He's a man of what? Understanding. There is two comparisons made throughout Proverbs. Can anybody tell me what that is? Two types of men. That's right. Wise and fools. So a lot of times these verses will give you the wise, what happens if you're going to be wise. And on the other hand, it's going to say what you're going to do if you're going to be a fool. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 22. How do we obtain, and this is for you men, how did we obtain favor from the Lord? All right. To find a wife, and that says in this verse, is a good thing. Proverbs, hold on to that thought because I'm going somewhere else with it here in just a minute. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 20. If we listen to advice and accept instructions, what do we gain? All right, we gain wisdom. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 17. Oh me, I can't read my writing. Bread gained by deceit is sweet, but afterwards what happens? So if we gain bread by deceit, what does it happen? What happens to us after that? Can you imagine having a mouthful of gravel? Exactly. So that tells us if we gain bread by deceit, it's really gravel in our mouth. So how do we get our bread? Honesty. By using honesty. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 9. It's better to live in the corner of the housetop than what? Okay, sharing a house with a contentious wife, a quarrelsome wife, someone who wants to argue all the time. Yeah. So let's go to verse 19. It's better to live in a desert land than with what? Again, a wife that's going to argue. So what does that tell our wives what they need to do? I understand sometimes you have to argue. It depends on how you're treated. But a wife should be what? What does the scriptures teach? Okay, submissive. Yeah. I'm going to stop at that because I'm going to get in trouble if I keep talking. Chapter 22, verse 1, a good name is chosen rather than what? Great riches. And favor is better than silver and gold. So a good name is important. It's more important than great riches. Proverbs 22, verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, and what's going to happen? The scripture He will not depart from it. Chuck's smiling on that one. And that's okay. Because sometimes I have a hard time with that. Exactly. Exactly. And that depends on which character you are in Proverbs. If you're wise, you will do that, won't you? But if you're a fool, it's possible that you're going to leave. You're going to leave what you've been taught. That's exactly right. That's right. So parents are instructed to train up your children in the way they should go. Proverbs 23 verse 12, apply to the heart and to your ears for what? Okay, so you get, apply your heart to instruction. Instruction's important. And to your ear, the words of knowledge. Proverbs 23, verse 23. Buy the truth and do what with it? Don't sell it. Buy the truth and sell it not. It's important for us to understand how important the truth is. It's not something that we want to sell down the road. Proverbs 24, verse 33, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest will bring what? What's that going to bring? Some might think it's going to bring rest. But guess what happens when you do that on a regular basis? It becomes, that's what you do every day. And that's why it becomes poverty, because you don't do anything. You sleep, you slumber, fold your hands to rest. Proverbs 25, verse 21, if you give your enemy bread and water to drink, what will that do to them? And this would go back into something Jesus taught, wouldn't it? What does it do? That's right. When you do good to your enemy, maybe you're giving them food, maybe you're giving them something to drink, it will heap coals of fire on their head. That's right. Proverbs 26, 13. The sluggard said, there's a lion in the road. There's a lion in the street. Why does he say that? Why is he making that statement? That's right. He's looking for an excuse to stay at the house and do nothing. Remain lazy. So that's important for us not to make excuses when it comes to our work. Proverbs 27, verse 1, why should we not boast about tomorrow? What does that verse say? That's right. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, so you can't boast about tomorrow. Proverbs 28, 6, how is the poor man better than a rich man? Okay, so the poor man walks in his integrity, and the rich man in his crooked is crooked in his ways. Proverbs 29, 17. Oh, is that 17? Proverbs 29. Maybe it is 17. It's bad when I can't read my own writing. Discipline a son will give you what? So if we don't discipline our son, what do you think we'll get? It's going to be just the opposite, isn't it? It's going to be trouble. You're going to be full of trouble. Proverbs 30, verse 24 through 28. And I should have looked at this so I'd know what I was talking about. 4 things on the earth are small, but they are exceedingly wise. What are those 4 things it makes mention of here? started in verse 25. Okay, the ant, the rock badger, the locust, and what did you say that last one was? Okay, mine says lizard. Mine says lizard. And it depends on the version you have, it may say that. But those things are small, yet they're exceedingly wise. Locusts don't have a king, yet all of them march in rank. Okay. Last question, Proverbs 31. If you were to describe this virtuous woman, how would you describe her? Just in one sentence, what would you say about her? Okay, works hard. And that actually starts in verse 10. I would describe this person as a woman who fears the Lord. You think about the characteristics of this woman that's talking about here in 31:10 through the remainder of the chapter, and you will quickly think this is talking about a woman who fears the Lord. Hebrews. We start Hebrews tomorrow. If you have not started the reading, here's a good time to jump in. Don't pay attention to Friday's Hebrews chapter 5. That's actually Hebrews chapter 5 through 8. So when you look at that list, you're going to chapter 8 on Friday instead of just 5. Yes. Appreciate your comments this afternoon.
Thank you. Is it working? Yep. Good. All right. Okie dokie. Lesson 10. We are finishing lesson 10, and we will get to some of the questions tonight, and we'll use the questions as a matter of, we'll use some of the questions as review from what we talked about last Sunday to set up what we're going to talk about tonight. We'll look at the map here in just a moment. Jeffrey would lead us in a word of prayer, please.
Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we come to you at this time, Father, thanking you for this time, place, and opportunity we have to assemble this Wednesday night, Father, to study from your word. Father, it's our prayer that each and everything we do here tonight will be done according to thy will. Father, thank you for our teachers of our classes, Father. We pray your blessings upon them, that you'll be with them as they teach the classes tonight, that they'll have a remembrance of things they've prepared, Father, and that we'll open our Bibles and study the things that are taught, Father, and we have application in our life so far. Father, we continue to be mindful of those of our number that are on our prayer list, sick list, Father. We pray for Marty Barker and Nancy Phillips. Pray for Faith Spence and what else. Pray for Barb Wilkinson and Penny Weinbrenner and others that are on our minds, Father. We pray your blessings upon them, that you'll be with them and comfort them. Father, we're thankful for this church and pray that you will continue to be with us as we strive to put you first in our lives, Father, and have a home one day with thee in heaven. Father, we're thankful most of all for the Son Jesus, for his death upon the cross, for the hope we have of eternal life, forgiveness of sins through his death. Father, we know that as Christians from time to time we do sin and fall short of thy glory. It's our prayer is each one of us repents of those sins, though, that just forgives us. Continue to go with us, our prayer in Christ's name.
Amen. So, the lay of the landscape is changing. The name of things is changing. World powers are shifting as we move through the biblical story. We're still on the ascending part of that plot structure, the rising action, but we are at the very end of that rising action because we are getting very close to the climax of the biblical story. But things are changing in the world. Different world powers are coming to be. And what are these main ones that we looked at here? The one in the north here and the one in the south here over in Egypt. What are those on your map work? So you have the Seleucids. Which one is the Seleucids? All right. Yep, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. We will talk more about what those are, but we're kind of getting ahead in our map work here. So what on earth is the Ptolemaic Empire down here and the Seleucid Empire here? And what is this one? The Maccabean. Who are the Maccabeans? I mean, that's strange. This is the land of Canaan. So who are the Maccabees? And we'll get to that here in just a moment. And of course, there is around this time, this is a map of the world around the mid-2nd century BC, around 150, 160. And so there is a world power on the rise over here, and its capital is somewhere off the map, but right over here. What is that world power? Rome. Rome is rising, and Rome will become the fourth great empire in that series of world empires that we talked about. So, in getting to the questions as review, how many world kingdoms are described in Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's vision of Daniel 7? 4. What are the names of them? That's right. So Sunday, we looked at that great statue, that Nebuchadnezzar's dream representing those 4 world empires. They are also described in Daniel 7 as 4 beasts. Describe those beasts of Daniel 7. What were those beasts like? Yep. And it also stood up like a man's heart was given to it. Yeah. You want to take the next one? Yeah. What about the bear was interesting? Yeah, it was hunched. That's right. Which one was that, Chuck? The Persians. Yep. And then it had 3 ribs in its mouth. That's interesting. 3 kings are mentioned. It might be the idea of dominance, though, over some surrounding powers. But there's 3 kings mentioned in another prophecy. And speaking of that prophecy, I have some things to hand out here. I almost forgot. I will hand them here. Take them and hand those out. I will let y'all know what those are. So let's finish number 2 though here. What was the third one like? 4 wings. So 4. The number 4 is mentioned. And we'll look at why that is significant. And then the 4th is what? Yeah, a great and terrible beast. It had teeth of what? Iron. Iron kind of relates to what empire? Roman Empire, war, the machine of Rome. So, how is God's kingdom described in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7? That's right, a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Yep. Who is given the kingdom in Daniel 7? Son of Man. Somebody else is also given the kingdom, though, along with the Son of Man. The saints. The saints possess the kingdom, it says. Alrighty. How would the beast in Daniel's vision affect the lives of God's people? Yep, persecution. And so we're going to talk. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So they were taking them captive. They were persecuting them, scattering them. They greatly affected the lives of God's people. And so what kingdoms did the ram and the male goat particularly represent? And these are the ones we're going to get into tonight. There you go. All right. So you had the Persians and Greece. So you have these three visions. Nebuchadnezzar is about the statue, 4 parts of the statue. And then you have Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts. And the 4 beasts are the same world kingdoms that are being talked about in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. But then Daniel has another vision in Daniel 8 where just 2 of those 4 are recognized and talked about, specifically the Medo-Persian Empire and Greece. So we're going to talk about particularly Greece tonight. But when it concerns Persia and Greece, that little sheet that I handed out to you, that's a summary of the Daniel chapter 11 prophecy. I think I mentioned to y'all Sunday about this. The Daniel 11 prophecy is probably the most detailed historical prophecy that has ever been made. All right, you read Daniel. Daniel 11 is pretty complicated, but it talks about a northern king and a southern king. Okay? Northern kingdom, Seleucids. Southern kingdom, Ptolemaic Empire. And it talks about their dealings back and forth with each other and how that affected the lives of God's people. It is so detailed and so precise. It talks about specific kings and what they did, although it doesn't mention them by name. It says the king of the north and the king of the south. But when you go through and you match it with what happened in history, it is astonishingly accurate. So much so that people try and make the book of Daniel out to be written several hundred years later, or maybe just maybe a couple hundred years later after when he wrote it, so that people say, well, it just happened. It was written after the fact. You know, he's just recording history. But no, Daniel's writing in Babylon at the end of the 7th century into the 6th century, and so he's describing these things long before they happen. So that's interesting. Look at that as a study guide. I did not have time to just go through that tonight with you because that's a pretty long thing to talk about. So got it to you in a chart. So in the vision that Daniel has of the ram and the male goat, and describe that male goat. What was that male goat like? What was he doing? And how did he attack that ram? Yeah, that's right. Coming very, very fast. And then when he hit that ram, what happened to that ram? Yeah. Yeah. And the ram wasn't able to overcome him. So he was absolutely demolished by this male goat seemingly coming out of nowhere. There is a notable horn between the eyes of this male goat. And then it talks about let's go ahead, since we're going to be studying this, let's go ahead and turn over to Daniel chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8, and specifically about this notable horn between its eyes. Horns in this kind of language, this kind of prophetic literature, usually represents power, some sort of kingly figure. And the great sea beast in Revelation, that has 7 heads and 10 horns. It is, and in the beast of Daniel chapter 7, there's these 10 horns as well, and they represent kings. And so horns often represent maybe a group of kings or a specific king. It's pretty much not debated that this notable horn between the eyes of the goat that he used to slaughter this ram, if that was going to represent a king of Greece in history, who would that represent? Alexander the Great. Everything that Daniel 8 says about this male goat confronting the ram, in verse 7 it says, I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled them, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. And that was Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was one of the most ferocious, the most brutal, one of the greatest warriors who ever lived. He is famous for never having lost a single battle. And do you want to know how old he was when he died? 32. Okay, yeah, yep. Macedon, yeah. Yes, Macedonia, it was his, you could consider it his headquarters, although Alexander the Great did station in Babylon too. Babylon's just the great city, you know. You go to Babylon and you have a good time, and that's actually how Alexander died. He was said to be drinking in Babylon and died mysteriously somehow. I don't know, maybe his health wasn't great, maybe something happened, but died at 32. But Macedonia was his base. That's where he started out from and conquered. And here was his king. Here's the extent of the kingdom that he conquered. This chart is in the book, but it's not in the large format. But this just gives you an idea. Most of our maps have been focusing on this area right here. And usually the Persian Gulf, remember we've had Susa several times. And Susa is usually over in the very corner of the map, right? Well, on this map, Susa is right there in the middle. And so, look at how far Alexander the Great conquered. He got to India and decided to go back home to Macedonia after conquering all the way to India. And so he finished this campaign, by the way, at in 326. He had finished that campaign, and then it was 3 years after conquering that far that he died. So he actually achieved conquering all the way to India 3 years before he died. So around 29 years old, and he had conquered from Macedonia to India. It's just amazing what he did. He truly was like this male goat that came out of nowhere, that came so swift and conquered the world. Very few people in history have had such an effect as Alexander and the culture that the Greeks imposed upon the world. And I say imposed because the Greeks loved their culture. I mean, doesn't everybody love their culture? People like their culture. We're proud of certain things in our culture, but the Greeks were very proud of their ways, their language, their art, their sciences, their philosophies. In fact, there's a term you've probably heard before. Alexander's goal was to Hellenize the world, or make it Hellenistic. You may have heard that term. What is Hellenistic, or what does it mean to Hellenize? Yeah, basically, you're going through and you're making all things Greek. You're trying to conform everybody. As you're conquering everybody, you're trying to, basically, your goal is to evangelize and spread or impose your ways upon the world. Yeah, their culture, yeah. So we are actually very affected today, still, by the Greek culture. I mean, when you look at modern thought today, so much of it is still informed by the Greek philosophers of old, and the language of the Greeks played a very key role in a particular document that is very important to us, the New Testament. That is right. Played a very important role in the coming about of the New Testament. That was the language it was written in. It was the language that pretty much everybody knew at the time. It was like this universal language. I mean, Hellenization had its bad things. It definitely did, but when the whole world had this universal language of being able to speak Greek, or at least the world, this world of that day, that part of the globe, it made God's word very easily accessible to the masses of people. As the Bible was originally written, the New Testament was originally written in the Greek language. So God is definitely bringing about His work through this culture, through this people. But like all kingdoms, did the Greek Empire last forever? Did Alexander the Great last forever? Not very long. In the vision, what happens to the male goat and the notable horn between his eyes? That's right. And this is where it turns into an absolute soap opera. Here, it gets crazy. So Alexander the Great dies. Upon his death, he bequeaths his entire kingdom that he has conquered, not to one person, not to two, but to four. To a foursome. And these four generals, these mighty men, you could think of them like mighty men. Like, David had his mighty men, all right, that went with him. These are like Alexander's mighty men. And their names were originally, and I'll say originally, I'll explain that in just a moment, but originally it was Ptolemy, Antigonus, Cassander, and Seleucus. And that's where the Ptolemaic, on our map, remember the Ptolemaic Empire, and which part, where was that at? Egypt. And where were the Seleucids? Farther north. You could say Babylon all the way up through there. Now, on the map, we had our map, and we only had two of them up there. What happened to the other ones? Well, things changed really quickly. So originally, you had four, like I said. You had Cassander, Antigonus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. And here you go. Here they are. Here's Seleucus here. Here's the Ptolemies here. And look at this, the Holy Land, and all the way around here, Greece, all the way to would it be Greece, Athens? That's owned by Antigonus. And then over here you have Cassander. He's just a little bitty here. But then you have this other guy called Lysimachus. And so here's what happened. There was a fifth player on the scene really early who was a bodyguard of Alexander the Great. His name was Lysimachus. And the kingdom was originally given to the four, Antigonus being one of those. But Lysimachus teamed up with all the other guys, and they killed Antigonus, assassinated him. And Antigonus's part went to Lysimachus. So if you look it up online and you look up who Alexander's four generals were, sometimes it's Lysimachus instead of Antigonus. I'm having hard pronouncing my words tonight. But that's the reason. That's why I say it's crazy. It's like a soap opera very early on. People killing, people assassinated, which that's how it's always been, Everything, nothing changes, nothing's new under the sun. And so, as time moves on, though, the two that become really powerful are, and you can just look at this map and tell. are the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And it's their interaction that between the two that Daniel 11 talks about in our chart. And they're talked about as the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Now the reason, why does the Bible talk about any of this? Why does the Bible talk about the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, this northern empire and southern? Why does that have anything to do with the biblical story? Somebody tell me. That's right. The biblical story, the biblical story is happening right between them. And so whenever they fight and go at each other, guess who gets caught up right in the middle? God's people are right there. And they're going to experience the hardships that come with war that's not their war. It's not their war. They didn't ask for it. They're just trying to rebuild Jerusalem, right, and get back to their life. That's how it is sometimes, though. Wars to go on. We don't want it, but they go on. Sometimes we get caught up in the middle, and we got to get through it with God's help. That's what happens to God's people sometimes. And as for these empires over here, Cassander and Lysimachus, well, guess who eventually starts absorbing them and starts conquering them? Rome. Rome is that. Yeah, that's right. And actually, in Daniel chapter 11 talks about how the Seleucid kings get a little bit too big for their britches. They try to go attack Rome. Guess how that works? Doesn't work out very good. So Rome is this big world power that's coming on the scene that's eventually going to engulf this entire space. And Rome's going to become that fourth empire. So, like I said, shifting sand, things are changing like crazy. Now, in the vision of Daniel chapter 8, as these four notable horns come up, something else happens. Something else happens. It says, out of one of them, verse 9, out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, towards the glorious land. And it grew to the hosts of heaven and cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the hosts, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Who's his sanctuary? That's talking about the temple. So one of these little horns, back to the map, one of the four, there's going to come a particular horn out of that like a king. And he's going to exalt himself. And he's going to be great. And he's going to take away the sacrifices. He's going to make sacrificing to God against the law. And he's going to cast down the temple. Well, we know who did that in history during the time of the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. It was none other than this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes. This guy was a madman. He got his throne through treachery and deceit. And you kind of go through Daniel chapter 11, there's people assassinating people one after the other, people killing people. And this guy came on the scene. He actually had a nickname. Antiochus Epiphanes means exalted one or glorious one. Sort of like God. He's God manifest. But he had a nickname called Epimanes. They called him Epimanes, which meant madman. And he was a madman. And he had a lot of conflicts with Egypt against the Ptolemaic kings down in Egypt. And on one particular occasion, God's people got caught up in the middle of that, and he became enraged with God's people. He famously went and set up an idol to his God, his supreme God, which would be Zeus. He offered a pig on the altar. What's significant about that? Unclean. He took away the daily sacrifices of the Jewish people. He brutally murdered many of them, butchered them, and tortured them. And this went on for quite a while. Well, there were a lot of people that died. Some rose up, the Maccabees. And that's why on that map, why we have the Maccabean Empire, because there was a group of people led by a man named Judas Maccabeus. And Judas Maccabeus and his people waged guerrilla warfare against the Seleucid kings. A peace treaty was finally reached years later after this guy died. Peace treaty was finally reached. There was a ceasefire, you could say, in the middle of all that, but fighting resumed. And it was just a very hard time for God's people. We often don't think of it because a lot of times when we think of persecution, what automatically goes off in our head? When we think of Christian, we think of Christian. We think of Rome. That's right. We think of Rome. We think of Christians being persecuted by people like Nero, people like Domitian, people like that. But the persecution that this guy brought on God's people was certainly brutal. In fact, I think some of these people who died by his hand are actually found in the Bible. In Hebrews chapter 11, turn over there. In Hebrews chapter 11 talks about people who are persecuted. But Hebrews chapter 11 is talking about people who are specifically under what law? The old law, the old dispensation. In Hebrews 10, there in verse 35, somebody read 35 through 38, please, of Hebrews 11. Yeah. And so some were what? Specifically. What were some things that stood out in light of what we're talking about here? Yeah. Tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. That definitely describes what happened during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And this created really a new landscape. Everything we've talked about tonight, the Seleucids, the Ptolemies, that Maccabean kingdom. And with the Roman Empire coming on the scene, it's just going to get more and more interesting, because when the Romans finally do come on the scene, all right, God's people had suffered greatly at the hand of some particular Antiochus Epiphanes. The Romans, though, had certain respect for the Jews. I say respect, a lot more than Antiochus Epiphanes gave them. The Jews had been a long-standing people in the land. And Rome's way of conquering wasn't necessarily like Alexander the Great and his people. It wasn't necessarily exactly like the Grecian Empire. Rome really tried to strike deals with people, but they would keep people under their thumb, all right? They'd make sure people knew we're boss. We're the boss around here. You belong to us, not the other way around. And so Rome gave the Jews some freedom. He gave them leeway. They didn't outright persecute the Jews, but they kept their thumb on them. And that world, that tension, is the backdrop to what we find when the climax of the biblical story comes on the scene. And when you read about Jesus' life and the things that transpire there, and you read about the crucifixion, you see the tension between the Romans and the Jews right there. And you see the deal making, all right? You see the appeasements. You see we got to keep these people happy or there'll be an uprising. It really was a delicate balance that the Romans were trying to keep. And all of that, there's some history behind that. And there's probably some history going all the way back to what happened with the Greeks and so forth. And so it's a long story, but it's it's coming to its head with Jesus. And we're going to talk about that on Sunday. Thank you all so much for your kind attention. We are officially through with the rising action of the biblical story, the Old Testament section of the biblical story. And now we find what it's all been coming to, what Daniel, what Ezekiel, what so many of the prophets were talking about would come. Yeah. All right, Blessed Assurance. Just a really beautiful song here with a great message. Talk about our confidence in our salvation and what God has done for us. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heir of salvation, purchase of God. Born of His Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect delight, visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Angels descending, bring from above, echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I in my Savior am happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness, lost in His love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
Surprise, I'm not Marty. I wish I was a little bit taller, but I'm not. Tonight we'll be in James again, but we're going to be in the 4th chapter. And the teenagers are already going, he's going to talk about it again? Yeah, I am. So, my favorite place to be is on the Current River. I know at least one family in here knows where that is, and I don't know if any of the rest of y'all do, but the Current River is where I grew up. And my favorite place to be is there early in the morning. Because every morning, doesn't matter if it's summer, doesn't matter if it's in the dead of winter, there's going to be just a little bit of a fog on the water. Because, well, it's a neutral temperature all year round, so the air reacts around it, right? So you get to see that vapor on the water. And I mean, sometimes you'll get down there and it'll be so thick you'll think, it's never going to leave. Can't even see through it. And sure enough, if you wait around just a little bit after daylight, it's gone. Every single time, without fail. The Bible tells us that our lives are just as fleeting. Come now, verse 13, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You're just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. Therefore, to the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. This whole chapter is talking about the conflicts and quarrels that people have with one another. It's talking about attitudes that are contrary to the ones that God wants us to have. He tells us multiple times in this passage and in the book of James how necessary humbling ourselves before God is. And at this ending conclusion of these thoughts, he tells us just how short this life is. Think, the world's maybe, 6,000-ish years old? The best hope one of us might have, there might be a couple of us in here that might make it to 100. Most of us are looking at 70, 85 years, maybe less. In the grand scheme of human existence, that's not a long time. In the scheme of eternity, it's nothing. It's not even a blip. And God is telling us, don't make all your plans for yourself. We should make our plans with God in mind. Make our plans with His will in mind and what He would have us to do. And if there's any question, that's verse 17 is one of those to where it's ambiguous, but there's kind of a purpose, right? If you have a sore conscience about something, don't do it. If you know something is good, do it. If you know something's not good, we shouldn't be doing it. We shouldn't be associating with it. We shouldn't see how close we can get to the proverbial line in the sand. But if the Lord wills, we'll have tomorrow, right? But we have no guarantee of that. Tonight, if you need to make a change, because our life is a vapor, you have an opportunity tonight to set things right. If you have need and we can be of assistance, please make them known as we stand and as we sing.
Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come.
Good to see everyone out tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for making the effort to come out on this Wednesday night. Thank you to all the parents for bringing your children out tonight. I know it's school night and a lot going on, but thank you for making the effort for doing that. Thank you to our teachers for all that you do as well. And thank you to Ryan for his words tonight also.